Senator Feeney.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise obviously to speak in support of the underlying budget that's going to be before us this week. Mr. President, I want to thank the gentleman that just spoke and his remarks, particularly about bipartisan approaches to government and to this budget, certainly legislation before us this session, and the contrast that we see in other jurisdictions, specifically in the federal administration. And I've been saying, to a lot of folks that ask me about how we function in this type of atmosphere over the last few months, they've been asking, how do you do it? And I point out how the Massachusetts Senate works. I speak parochially because this is what I know, and this is where we serve. And Mr. President, I'm always proud to talk about the way that we do things here, and that we don't simply, veer away from our core values. In fact, we embrace them. But we also understand that everybody here has a different frame of reference, and we would be wise to work closely with each other to make sure that everybody across Massachusetts is being represented. Not one senator has all the answers, not one committee has all the answers. And when we do, as the gentleman who just spoke before me articulated, when we come together, then we can find maybe not the perfect answer, maybe not just the Democratic answer or the Republican answer, but the answer that best serves the people of Massachusetts, and I think that is important. Again, not wavering on our own values, but in fact, listening is probably the most important thing that we can do, Mr. President. This FY26 Senate Ways and Means budget represents a back-to-basics approach. It is a balanced, spend within our means budget that uses the revenues that we have available today to invest in the most pressing needs of our Commonwealth, Mr. President, all in the face, as we have heard already this afternoon, of federal spending uncertainty and economic volatility. It has been said perfectly by the Vice Chair of this committee and by the Chair of this committee and all those that have spoken today, the difference in what we're seeing out of the federal government. And I'm proud, Mr. President, that in the Massachusetts Senate, we lead with common sense, we lead with decency. We lead with decency. There's a lot of talk coming out of Washington, D.C. from the administration, a lot of tweets, a lot of social media, but it's important for us to understand that it's our actions that speak a lot louder than our words. And in this budget, we continue to act, not just talk. I'm proud that there are no new taxes, again, in this budget. It was spoken about this afternoon by the minority leader. This budget does not raise new taxes. We need to be clear about that. It uses available revenues that we have today to balance the budget, spending what we have now while also strategically planning and positioning us for the future. It's a smart approach. The largest investments in the budget are also the most significant factors affecting the pocketbooks of families and working people across the Commonwealth. Healthcare, education, housing, child care costs, just to name a few. On healthcare, Mr. President, I just want to talk about this for a quick moment here. I had the opportunity, as we were doing hearings across Massachusetts just in the last couple of months, to host a joint Ways and Means hearing in my district at Attleboro High School on the topic of health and human services, where we heard from the various secretariats and commissions about the rising costs of health care, prescription drugs especially, and the acuity affecting our system. It was clear at this marathon hearing, which many members of this chamber were there to listen to this talk, it is clear that over half of the state's budget is dedicated to health and human service investments, and the many people served by the Commonwealth, including 1 in 4 Massachusetts residents, almost half of all children and individuals with disabilities in Massachusetts, as well as low-income families and certain senior citizens, including those in nursing facilities. Mass health costs represent the largest single cost increase of $2.3 billion over FY25. And the reason for this increase, as we heard from the distinguished chair of Ways and Means this afternoon, higher acuity, yes, and higher utilization. And it's that utilization that I want to talk about for just a moment. More and more people are coming onto our healthcare rolls for a variety of reasons, and that adds significant costs. These individual costs are going up for a variety of reasons, like I said, including a shift away from employer-sponsored plans onto state-sponsored plans. And we are seeing it on the Mass Health side and across HHS agency line items. I ask that that hearing if the amount of people that we see going from their employer-sponsored health plans onto state-subsidized health plans is normal, and is it sustainable? And the answer loud and clear was no and no. It is not sustainable, it's not normal, and I think we need to do our part in the coming session to make sure that we are addressing that issue specifically. The Senate budget carefully invests in these programs while we in the Senate remain laser-focused on policy that is going to reduce those healthcare costs this session, and as we have done in previous sessions, including many smart and forward-thinking matters that have come before this chamber and from the Joint Committee on Financial Services, which I have the privilege to chair, and the Joint Committee of Healthcare Financing under the stewardship of Chair Friedman. Mr. President, amid the federal administration's war on libraries, and we heard this from my good friend, the Vice Chair of this committee, this budget allocates $20 million in state aid to public libraries, something that the Senate has championed not only last fiscal year, but in previous years before that. We need, Mr. President, to continue to invest in our municipal libraries, the quote-unquote living rooms of our democracy, especially amid the rising tide of cuts and opposition coming from Washington, D.C. Imagine opposing our libraries. Imagine cutting funding to our libraries, the richest country in the history of civilization, and we can't fund libraries. It's unacceptable. The Massachusetts Senate once again doubles down in making sure that we are investing wisely in those libraries in our communities. Mr. President, you have heard me rise, and the members of this chamber rise many, many times, specifically on the issue of homelessness. And as we talk about the housing front in this budget, and certainly in other pieces of legislation that we will deal with this year, it's important to note that we continue our steady investments in housing affordability and accessibility, including, in my view, what I believe should continue to be our focus, which is on ending homelessness once and for all in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts by investing in permanent supportive housing and the Housing First model. For the last 7+ years, every time I've had the opportunity to stand up and talk about homelessness, I use that quote that we can end homelessness in Massachusetts. And sometimes people that pay attention will grab me and they'll say, you know, Paul, are you serious about this? Because we've just come to normalize it, that it's some accepted and expected thing that there's going to be chronically homeless individuals on the streets of Massachusetts. Again, we're smarter than that. We can figure out a way to end homelessness here in Massachusetts, and it's not some abstract pipe dream. The plan is there, the playbook is there, and this Senate, the Massachusetts Senate, has led on this year after year, and I'm incredibly proud of the investments that we've made in Housing First and with our Home and Healthy for Good line items. That makes a difference. It makes a difference, and I'm telling you that we can end homelessness in Massachusetts. Our budget this year does that through $8.9 million for the HHG, otherwise known as Home and Healthy for Good Rehousing and Supportive Services Program, and $10 million for sponsor-based supportive permanent housing to support new housing units and case management and wraparound services for vulnerable individuals. What a novel concept, Mr. President, and through you to our colleagues. Ending homelessness by putting people into homes, by giving them the wraparound services to get them back on their feet and in stable housing. That is the cost-effective homelessness response model, and it's one that the Senate has been championing year in and year out. I've said it frequently when we talk about chronic homelessness, that we somehow expect people to find sobriety, to get mental health treatment, and to do all of that while they're sleeping on a bench at night, not knowing where they're going to sleep or where they're going to eat, or when next time they're going to eat. How can you expect somebody to find a moment of clarity when they're sleeping in a park, when they're sleeping on a sidewalk? When we invest in Housing First, when we invest in Home and Healthy for Good, when we invest in permanent supportive housing, we're allowing them to have that opportunity for a moment of clarity, to get those services, and to get them into stable housing. It's not only the fiscally smart and efficient thing to do, Mr. President, it's just morally right. In Massachusetts, we continue to lead with our morals. Last but not least, Mr. President, I am very, very proud, and it was mentioned earlier by the Chair of Ways and Means, that this budget fully funds Pappas Rehabilitation Center for Children, ensuring its continued operation through fiscal year 2026 to meet the physical, medical, and educational needs of the most vulnerable and medically complex young people in Massachusetts. We are in a very different place today than we were just a few months back when the Pappas Rehabilitation Hospital, formerly known Massachusetts Hospital School, was proposed to be shuttered and closed. But after the delegation reacted, came together, worked with stakeholders, with family members, with workers, we were fortunate to receive a pause from the governor and the administration on that closure, and today we have a budget that maintains services and programs at this critical facility. Mr. President, Pappas is not just a facility, however. I've been saying for the last couple of months since I've had the opportunity to visit there and to meet with many of the students, Pappas is a place where miracles happen. And it's a place worth investing in, given the highly unique and highly specific level of care and educational services offered for the most physically and medically complex children in Massachusetts. Mr. President, there is no place like Pappas in Massachusetts. And I would submit that there are probably no place like Pappas in the United States of America. We can lead, once again, this nation in showing the right way to care for these children. This budget represents a victory for all those kids who have utilized Pappas's unmatched services, level of care, commingled with educational opportunities and social opportunities, and the amazing people who work for them at Pappas. We have heard incredible testimony here at the State House and in the community about the importance of the unmatched care provided at Pappas, hearing from patients, parents, and the workforce. They have shown that we need to continue to come together, as this Senate has done, once again, acting, not just talking about it, but acting, to invest and to reimagine what Pappas can be in the future. I want to thank specifically our Senate President and the Chair of Ways and Means for ensuring that this matter was put into our budget, and I am grateful and truly proud of this work. The Massachusetts Senate is making a difference. It may not be hundreds and hundreds of children that are being served at Pappas right now, but the need remains. And by taking the steps that we are to fully fund Pappas and to continue working closely with stakeholders and the administration to find a solution to reimagine Pappas, once again, we can lead this country and show what it means to lead with compassion, with care, with common sense, and like I said, Mr. President, with decency. To close, Mr. President, this budget is carefully crafted based on revenues that are available today and directed toward key sectors that we all rely on in the Commonwealth. It is definitely a service-oriented budget that is focused on maintaining our commitment to core programs. While the federal government is trying to move us backwards, in Massachusetts, we're moving forward and investing smartly, carefully, dare I say compassionately. I know, Mr. President, that there are many, many amendments that will be debated this week. And I noticed that the lion's share of these amendments are focused on supporting our communities, our municipalities, supporting nonprofit organizations doing incredible work, supporting food pantries and community health centers, which are the front lines of our public health here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We're also supporting arts and culture organizations across Massachusetts. I had somebody tell me, Paul, with such trepidation and uncertainty and all sorts of volatility in the federal government, why would you invest in arts and culture? Because when you're up against it at times like this, that's when you do invest in arts and culture. We need it now more than ever. I believe that strongly, and I know that each of the members here that are filing amendments for the arts and cultural communities feel that as well. Incredibly important, especially when we see so much fear and division and people wondering how they're going to pay the bills. And that's when you invest in arts and culture, and we do that once again in this budget, Mr. President. I think all those investments, especially those that are directed to our communities and our districts, are something to be proud of, not apologize for. We say it all the time, and you just heard from the Vice Chair of Ways and Means that a budget is a statement of our values. No budget, Mr. President, is certainly perfect. No bill that we deal with in the Senate chamber is perfect at all, for that matter. But I say today that before we take our first steps at Memorial Day parades this weekend, we will take a final vote on a values-driven budget that reflects the passion, backgrounds, district knowledge, intelligence, and advocacy of 40 senators and 351 communities. For that, Mr. President, for that product, and especially for this process, I am grateful. Thank you, Mr. President.